Solutions to the Dropout Crisis, addressing the dropout crisis one strategy at a time. Brought to you by the National Dropout Prevention Center Network with support from K-12 and Fuel Education and in partnership with Clemson Broadcast Productions.
Welcome to Solutions to the Dropout Crisis, brought to you from the National Dropout Prevention Center at Clemson University by K-12 and Fuel Education. We appreciate you tuning in with us to watch this episode of Solutions. We're coming to you today from Orlando, Florida, where we are here at the Wounded Student Conference and the Student Success 9th Grade Conference. And so we're fortunate to be here. We're fortunate to have you viewing with us today. We are at the National Dropout Prevention Center, all about providing tools, resources, information, and things that you need as a practitioner to help students succeed and improve graduation rates across the country. And we're very pleased to do that. We have a lot of things going on at the National Dropout Prevention Center. Conferences certainly are part of our offerings. Our next conference coming up is in October. It's the National Dropout Prevention Conference, typically our largest event. This year it'll be October the 22nd through the 25th in Palm Springs, California. We're back in Orlando today, markedly, but we'll be in Palm Springs in October. So we invite you to take a look on our website under the conference section, look for our events. Also, we invite you to access our website. We undertake to provide things that you need to do your work and to learn about how to improve graduation rates. Our website's simple to find. Just Google Dropout Prevention. We're the top hit. Or you can go to www.dropoutprevention.org. I'm fortunate to be able to co-host this presentation today with Dr. Mark Wilson, who's one of our consultants with the National Dropout Prevention Center at Clemson. Mark, welcome.
Thanks so much, Sandy. It's good to be with you. And as we begin today's show, I'd like to remind everybody that the conversation should continue, and you'll find located at the bottom of our screen here, you can find a place for you to continue the conversation to make your comments. That's not all. You can go to find us on Twitter. The Twitter handle for the Dropout Prevention Center is @NDPCN. That's National Dropout Prevention Center Network. And the hashtag that we're using is Solutions. You can also find us on Facebook. And there's a spot up at the top of what you're looking at here that you can use there. And of course, these are archives, so you can share them, other people can look at them, and we hope the conversation will go on, because the conversation is going to be really rich today, Sandy. We're going to talk about how to really bring support and what can happen when a community comes together.
Mark, I understand we're going to learn about Graduate Marietta, the Student Success Center.
Absolutely.
Introduce our presenter and our guest.
Thank you. It's my honor. So with us today is Lee Colburn, and she is the director of the Graduation Marietta Student Success Center. She's been an elementary school principal, she's been a teacher, she's been a high school principal at Marietta High School, and recently she and a team developed an idea to come up with a solution to many of the problems that kept some of their kids from graduating, and she's going to share with us today. So Lee, take it away and tell us about Graduate Marietta Student Success Center.
I'd be happy to. So about 4 years ago, we started the research on the Graduate Marietta Student Success Center. So our talk today is titled Student Voice, Straight Talk, and a Culture of Hope. Our work is built on trust with our students, trust with our families. Our center was named the Georgia Innovation of the Year this year.
Congratulations.
Thank you, from the Georgia Charter Foundation. We did begin the center with a small donation from our Charter Foundation. That is how we started. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the presentation, because I know funding streams are important for people to understand. As we go to the first slide here, it's important to me to say that I am back at the National Dropout Prevention Conference, and I truly believe, had I not come to the conference almost 5 years ago, we would not have a Student Success Center. I came to the conference and was introduced to the research of Robert Barr and Emily Gibson. Actually met Emily Gibson at a conference, listened to her presentation about the paradigms of poverty and what they were doing to build hope and resiliency in students that were not surrounded by many supports, were facing trauma, were facing barriers. I highly recommend this book to anyone who's trying to prepare the hearts and the minds of their teachers for the type of work that we're talking about doing in the center, which is making sure that we eliminate excuses, we identify barriers, but we also eliminate excuses. So we're not talking about the soft bigotry of low expectations. We're talking about raising expectations for children with tremendous barriers and what it takes to do that, what kind of supports they need to do that. So our first slide, when we look at this, I call this slide our persistent plant. I think teachers look for hope a great deal, and this slide, oftentimes I open my presentation asking people what this slide means to them, and I get lots of different stories. I think one of the most consistent things I hear from teachers is the story of that student that inspires the teacher. As teachers, we want to inspire our students, but you always have those success stories, you hope, over your career of students that you know you've made a difference and you know you changed the path of their lives, or you enabled them to change the path of their lives. And empowered them to do so. And so we call this our persistent plant slide, but it's all about hope. Here, it all begins with the trust circle. So this slide is extremely easy to understand. Students need to trust their schools. Schools need to trust their local educational agencies. The local educational agencies need to trust the communities, and the communities and the families and the students have to trust each other. It's an extremely easy slide to understand, but it can take a great deal of time and work to build a trust puzzle or a trust circle within your community. A lot of the work that we do in the center would be considered something in the gray zone. It's a little different than what schools typically do. And so it requires the trust of families, of the administration, and of the staff that we bring into the center. We also ask agencies to give us staff and give us money. And to do that as a school district, we have to inspire their trust for them to be able to allow us to do that.
And so you've talked about trust and you've talked about hope, and you showed the picture of the persistent plant, so the persistent flower. So what happened next? What did you do when you began to build from there?
So what we started with was a series of interviews, graduation interviews with students. We also looked at dropout interviews with students. And by dropout, I mean students that were going to statistically age out. So we talked about building trust. That's really the first step. Identifying needs in those conversations, and we'll talk about those in a few minutes. Identifying needs, but then also identifying resources, public and private. Establishing partnerships. As you see here, identifying funding sources. Most of our funding sources come outside the traditional funding sources for schools, but really a collaboration of funding with state agencies and nonprofits. Creating the structure that you think fits your school district and your school. While I think the work of the Graduate Marietta Student Success Center is replicable, its power is that it's flexible. So if you're identifying the needs, you're identifying the needs of your community. You're identifying the resources that match those needs in your community. It may need to be inside your school. It might need to be in a community center. Maybe you partner with someone else. It just depends really on what you find out. And then the last is how you connect your students and families in a strategic way to the needs that they've identified.
So here's a kind of a logistics question, just a short one. So there wasn't a school, there wasn't this Graduate Marietta Student Success Center. This is separate from your high school.
It's separate from the high school, however, it resides inside the high school.
It's at the building, but it's a separate entity.
Yes,
so
sir.
the students who attend there in the past, they probably would have dropped out.
Yes.
Okay.
And it's really open to all students
Okay.
in the high school. So all students have access to the center. But truly, yes, our cases of our students that are facing the most significant or overlapping barriers, absolutely, they were at risk of dropping out.
So a lot of people would think, I suppose, Sandy, I know your experience in alternative ed, sounds like an alternative ed program, but different.
It is. It provides, I think, supports that are outside the norm, and it allows students to find success, find their future focus, find their pathway in a different way, but it is open to all 2,400 students in our school.
By choice.
By choice, absolutely. No student is made to come to the center, ever. But we have steady traffic to the center. And the majority of the employees who work in the center are not school system employees. They are agency staff from outside agencies. We can talk a little bit more about that as we go on.
Help us understand what it looks like. This is fascinating.
Okay, so in our next slide, what we'll talk about is that we did graduation stories. And this is a very simple thing that I began as a principal, where the last writing assignment every senior has done at Marietta High School for the last 4 years is we just ask them to tell us their graduation story. What has it been like for them the last 4 years? What was their greatest barrier to learning and graduation? What gave them hope at a time that things were challenging for them? What kept them engaged? What was something that they wish we had known about them and we never knew it? and what are their plans over the next 5 years. We conduct that interview either in person or we ask for that written essay from every single senior. So at this point, we have thousands of them. What I typically say is that what they didn't say is as important as what they said. What they did not say is that public schools were their problem. What they did not tell us is that it was about class size or which perfect high school schedule fit for them, because the question was specific. What is your greatest barrier to graduation? And what our students talked about was transiency, family changes, poverty, addiction, immigration, and social, emotional, physical health, mental health issues. What we found is that students of all socioeconomic levels, across all racial lines, old money, new money, no money, many of them talked about these same barriers. So for me as a principal, I then began to struggle with the classic school improvement plan. Because what my kids were telling me was the greatest barrier, that 20 to 25% that were struggling to graduate. They weren't telling me the things I was currently paying for in my school improvement plan. Not that tutoring wasn't important or that credit recovery wasn't important, but they didn't identify it as their greatest barrier, and their perspective was important to consider.
And this is consistent with the research at the National Dropout Prevention Center. Our research over the years has identified 21 categories of risk factors. And interestingly enough, well over half of those risk factors reside outside of the school.
Absolutely.
And these seem to as well.
Right. So family changes, transiency is a little bit easier to understand, although I found it to be a powerfully complicating barrier. But family changes, that could be divorce, it could be grief, it could be a teen pregnancy, it could be the incarceration of a family member. When you looked at poverty, what we found was that we have and we knew this already, we have a significant homeless population. And we have 26 apartments and 13 extended stay motels in our high schools. So we have a very mobile population, but many of our families are moving in crisis. And they're moving away from something, they're moving to something, but what they don't have much is a connection to our community. There are a lot of reasons why they arrived there, but poverty also became a really complicating factor. Immigration, we looked at how that affected the family as a whole, how the power structure between the parent and the child, particularly by high school, can get really messed up when the parent becomes very dependent on the child. With mental, emotional, social health, we're talking about clinicians coming into the building, things that our school counselors, while they're empathetic and have some training, they're not licensed clinicians. So many of the serious problems we're dealing with today, the cutting, the depression, suicide attempts, eating disorders, sexual abuse, those are not necessarily things that your high school counselor is trained to do. And let's be honest, when you have 1 to 500, which is what our ratio was, now it's 1 to 400, it's still not effective. And they get pulled too much, scheduling. And in a school that's transient, they are registering and withdrawing and scheduling kids all the time. I left addiction to last. In my community, that is, when I left it last to talk about, addiction is a major problem in my community. The number one used pill in my school is Xanax, not to the kids that it's prescribed by. But the leading cause of death in my community is heroin overdose between the ages of 18 and 30. And that's really what we see across the nation right now. So we're not unusual, we're just frightened, and we should be. So a great deal of work needs to be done in prevention and awareness, and it's going to take school systems across this country partnering with law enforcement and healthcare and the judicial system and treatment to really talk about how we're going to dig ourselves out of this crisis.
So Lee, you gathered this data to find out what your students, what their biggest obstacles were by intentionally having conversations with them.
We had very intentional conversations. And with every student that was aging out, we had one-on-one interviews. And what we also said to those students is, when did it begin to go off track for you? And they knew. What they didn't tell us was all the school answers. I wasn't reading on level in 3rd grade. I wasn't on level in math in 8th grade. But what they told us is when I believe they no longer saw themselves as a graduate. And that's a significant time. That was typically a life event, a lifetime that they saw their path differently. And when we asked, what could we have done differently for you during this time, they had ideas. But what frustrated me as a principal is they had ideas that were outside the scope of my work, outside the scope of my responsibility, expertise, resources. You know, maybe you could have helped my dad find a job. My mom really needed addiction services. When my brother died, we needed grief counseling. When we were going to get evicted, maybe you could have found us an apartment. When I was sexually abused, I could have had counseling. When I was pregnant, maybe you could have had daycare for my baby. So he talked about things that I knew were real, but I also knew I didn't have the expertise, the resources, or the ability to fund the things that they were asking me to. I think the most significant aha moment for us is, as you look at the slide, you'll see some students are dressed in graduation gowns and some students aren't. What we found is that our students who are graduating identified many of the same barriers as our students that weren't graduating. So that led us to another research question as to what was the difference. And what we really found is that there was an element of resiliency. Teachers were quick to say resiliency. It wasn't as easy to them to define it. They knew it when they saw it, but they didn't know how to harness it or develop it or encourage it necessarily in their students. And so that's really where the work of Emily Gibson and Robert Barr and stuff began to shape what we were doing with our students. I will say this, with the age out interviews, the kids that were really going under, what we found was an overlapping of these adverse elements. And I would say these things are not all weighted equally. What we found is that when you combined transiency and poverty, or transiency or poverty, with any of the other four, so when you combine transiency poverty with addiction, you combine transiency poverty with immigration, or with significant family changes, the students simply could not, many times, get out of that. And they were high need and under-resourced when it came to what they were facing. What we decided is to affect what we could. We can't make them more poor. We can't make them less immigrant. Hopefully we can affect addiction going forward. But what we can do is grow resiliency. And this is where the work of Robert Barr and Emily Gibson came in. We began to define in our school resiliency in 4 ways: hope and optimism, belonging, self-worth, which we also define as self-esteem, self-confidence, and pride, what they do, and purpose. And what we began to believe was, what could we program into our school? What programs did we already have that could provide students with these things? How could we more strategically match the students who are facing barriers with those things that could provide them with hope, could provide them with purpose? And many of the things are the things you guys talk about. Credit recovery is a way to give a kid hope. Restorative discipline is a way to give a kid hope. Suspending a kid because you find a dime bag of pot has no impact on them. Okay, it just tells them not to smoke at school, but it does nothing for their craving or their need or why they're smoking in the first place. It does nothing for them. Missing 10 days of math is not going to decrease their desire to smoke. Okay, so what we began to look at is, can you then, instead of the 10 days of suspension, match that student with addiction and recovery services? Can you provide their parents with drug kits to take home? And can you match them with someone who's a young adult in recovery who can come in and do universal screenings with them at school? And hopefully you can hit them at the exposure and the experimentation stage and curb what's going to happen later. Purpose, why is school important to me? What am I going to become? Self-worth, helping students develop a positive self-language so that they understand what they're doing.
So you did the graduation interviews, and then you had these four big concepts. How did you change what adults did to be able to make school really fit what kids needed?
Oh, we did a lot of things. In one faculty meeting, for instance, we identified the different barriers and we broke them down more than those 6. So like we did what I just did with you when we talked about family changes. Let's define that as divorce, teen pregnancy, an incarcerated parent, or grief. And in a faculty meeting, we put on every round table in the room a big piece of chart paper, and we wrote that at the top, and we asked teachers in our building to tell us of things or organizations, agencies in our community they knew who did great work in those areas. Those eventually became our identified potential partners. Who offers English classes for parents and does a great job? Who offers GED classes for parents? Who provides our food pantries? Our clothing closets.
And your teachers were able to bring those answers forward.
They were. And what also happened is teachers began to self-identify themselves as individuals who had possibly also faced some of those barriers. And when a student meets a teacher who also grew up with an incarcerated parent, and they realize they have that bond, that teacher becomes a real source of hope and future purpose. a teacher who's faced addiction themselves had a spouse or a child go through it. And this student's got a family member as well. So what we began to do was connect the personal stories of our students with the personal stories of our staff. And we helped our staff talk about their difficult times and why hope and worth and purpose and belonging had made a difference in their lives. We should talk about that. I believe hope, worth, purpose, and belonging is something every human being craves. I think if you take you take optimism out, I think you also have to realize a gang can also provide belonging, worth, and purpose.
Sure. And that's who we're competing against.
Absolutely. An abuser can keep that person under their control by attacking their self-worth and attacking their belonging. So they're powerful things that are used for students and used against students. Our faith-based communities exist based on spreading hope, worth, purpose, belonging. And we did engage a great many of faith-based partners in the center. So we can talk about how we've done that too in a public school. But I think those are the important things to understand.
All right.
Okay. The next block I think is really common sense for practitioners. Without behavioral support, without community support, you're not going to have academic achievement. We went about this in a couple of ways. One was we surveyed students and we surveyed teachers, and we said to students, what would exist in a center for behavioral support? And we said to teachers, what would exist in a center for behavioral support? There was a great deal of dissonance here. Teachers and that teacher mindset, and I have to say me and the principal mindset, when I saw Center for Behavioral Support, I tended to think discipline. What am I going to do to offset out-of-school suspension? That did become a part of what we did. But we surveyed all 2,200 kids. Many of them, as you know, in schools have had no discipline referrals or have had one. They've gone to ISS for being caught off campus for lunch. But when we asked students, what would you find in a Center for Behavioral Support? They said things like yoga, meditation, interviewing skills, dress for success, professional etiquette. They talked about life coaching, and they talked about soft skills, which we know as employers, and everyone in industry will tell you. They hire people because of their content knowledge. They fire people because of their lack of soft skills and their lack of social emotional awareness and EQ. So our kids were asking for those things, and that's part of how we've engaged our partners to teach yoga, to teach interviewing skills, to come and do an etiquette class, to take students to an etiquette school so they understand how to do that. That was really the only area really of dissonance. Our teachers and our students were very closely aligned in what they would find in a Center for Academic Achievement. They would find tutoring, they would find test prep, SAT test prep, assessments for aptitudes and interests and career matches. So many of those things were important.
Well, and all of that was going on during your planning phase, which after you identified the problem and you started searching for solutions, how long did it take you to develop things before you opened the doors?
We did research for about 2 years, really fully, maybe even a little bit longer than that, from the time that we started reading our books and really beginning to put our heads around it as staff. But 2 full years of interviews.
And this was you as the leader of the
I was the
school
principal of the
and
high school.
the staff of the high school designing an ancillary entity.
Yeah, I correct you only to say the students of
Okay,
the high
and the
school
students,
designing
right.
it. More so even than the teachers.
Okay.
The students designed it. And the students wrote the surveys to other students, and the students helped lead the groups. And I had some conversations with my teachers and faculty meetings in a way of professional learning, but I spent lots of times talking to kids and honoring what I think is student voice. And then talking to the community and calling in agency heads, the center of our homeless shelter, the center of our food bank. And guess what we found out when we're talking straight? We're all dealing with the same families. We're all dealing with the same students. And they all have expertise and resources that we don't have, and so do we. So what we began to do is really deepen those partnerships in a meaningful way. Those partners and those agencies that those teachers identified, we started calling them in for first one-on-one conversations and then calling them into groups. Our very first community partnership strategic planning meeting, we had 47 different agencies represented in our very first meeting. And we wrote a unified mission statement about what we were going to do as a community to support our students and families. And they made commitment statements before the end of the day, and it formed the work of the center.
So Lee, I know that our viewers are already beginning now to pull out their calculators, as educators do, and they're saying, sounds good so far, but how much does it cost?
All right, so let's look at this. Let's look at this funding wheel. I know particularly our superintendents and principals will be looking at it. Everything that is in blue, we can consider a district cost. General and state funding for some of the salaries, charter and state funding for some of the renovations that went on, and of course federal funding, and there we're talking about Title I, Title III. I think what's important though to understand in those different shades of blue is that if you really look at those words about what was pre-existing funding versus what is new funding. So much of what we did in our district, we had these random acts of good intention. We had a lot of great things going on, tutoring in the afternoon, buses to take kids home, a communities and schools mentor, a mental health person in another part of the school, a mentoring program. But they weren't being strategically aligned. And there wasn't one person overseeing that work to break down the silos between those initiatives, the staff, or the agencies. So what you really look at is when you look at this entire funding wheel, only 13% of the money to create the center was new money, okay, that came from the district. And the majority of that was my salary. And the salary of one other parent and community strategist when they came in. But we only created one new position, and that was the director. Then I absorbed 4 other positions, a graduation coach, a school counselor. I then began to oversee the social workers that were assigned for the district, and the parent and community liaisons that were paid for out of Title I money. So out of the 5 district positions, 3 are paid for our general fund, 2 are paid for with Title I. But 2 of those general fund positions were already funded, as were those title positions. So that's what you see there. Like with federal funding, you see that it's 21% of the budget of the center, but only, and this is a 2-year budget, by the way, so that's important to look at. It's our first 2 years. So 21% of the center was funded with Title I money, but only 1% of that money was new, and that was for one parapro that we hired to help oversee instructional assignments for kids and to give them to the certified teachers we have working in the center. We also work with college interns, retired teachers that come in and do our instruction for us for tutoring during the day and after. But then we raised $500,000 in cash donations, and the in-kind donations, the other 10 staff members that work in the center, the $100,000 worth of groceries for the food pantry, the appliances, that was all donated by agencies.
So the in-kind these are people from agencies coming in and devoting their time to
It is, and sometimes
services.
it was endowing the rooms. So we have 10 rooms in the center, and every one of them is endowed by Kiwanis, by Rotary, by AT&T, by United Way.
Lee, those in-kind employees, who are they? What are some of the agencies they represent?
We have Cobb Juvenile Courts. We have a probation officer that works with all of our students. We have an addiction clinician that works with the Georgia Council on Substance Abuse. We have a DFACS worker where all of our families and students that were under investigation or case management work with that DFACS worker. We have a faith-based clinician that we're adding next year who is one of 5 clinicians that work in the center. We have a communities and schools mentor who's a huge part of what we do. And I'm trying to think who else I'm forgetting. I don't think anybody, but I'll have to think about where their desks are in our community partnership. But they're all on staff. So, and a sexual abuse and domestic violence clinician that does student as well as family counseling with regard to that.
And these were people who already had jobs in other places.
Absolutely.
But now they are at Graduate Marietta Student Success Center.
Right, so it involved me sitting down, for instance, with Sabrina Watkins, who's the Cobb County Director of DFACS, and saying, Sabrina, how many families do I currently have under case management or under investigation with you? She pulled the number and came back to me, and I said, is that enough for one caseload? And she said, sure it is. And I said, can I just have my own person and just work in my school for me? Well, sure, because what difference did it make anyway, really? It just was changing the person's desk, and it was changing how the cases were assigned. But that wasn't difficult. But now my counselors and my social workers have a DFACS officer on site for all of our families, K through 12, that they're working with. And that DFACS worker is able to do so much more because they work in a place with a food bank, with parent education classes, with mental health provided, with addiction provided. So they can restore and support that family in a very different way.
So if I'm the head of an agency that you've approached for personnel, really what I'm doing, I'm just relocating and maybe slightly repurposing some of my personnel to do the work that they are to do
Right.
with the clients they're designed to do it with.
Right. It's going to Mess Ministries and Atlanta Community Food Bank and saying, can we have a food bank in our school? It's just a matter of sending the food to a different place. So we go through about 8,000 pounds of groceries every month for our families and our students, and it's all provided free of charge to the school. But we just had to put up the shelving and get a refrigerator and freezer from the scratch and dent place, and we were good. You know,
I would imagine that all of these service providers, they find great strength in the collaboration and the unity of working together for this purpose.
It was part of the heavy lifting to sometimes break down those silos. Agencies have different processes. They all have a different manual, a different way of doing things. They also, if they're nonprofits, compete for funding. But what we found and what I asked directors for was, I want that person that's so creative, they're almost driving you crazy because they're thinking outside the box and they want to do things differently. And someone that you believe has great judgment and you can trust to make autonomous and different decisions as they work with other agencies. What we also found is that we were successful at getting grants because we could show these agencies embedded in schools, but we could also show that that funding was going to go farther and be more effective because of the collaboration between the agencies. We also, we also have a housing specialist. So a housing specialist that's provided through a block grant in our city and a donor who matched that. And now they will work 20 hours a week because that's a new position for next year. So any of our families facing eviction or our families in transition can make an appointment at school, or our counselors can refer that, and they can come in and meet with a housing specialist with rapid rehousing, second chance housing, how to come back after bankruptcy, those things inside our school. Now,
So
for
all of the
families-
access to resources enhance the students' academic opportunities, but you provided academic opportunities as well.
We absolutely do. And it's important that you provide a full service school. If not, that center, in my opinion, becomes that place those kids go. And those kids really are all kids. All kids need a mentor. All kids need positive mental health. All kids need worth and belonging and purpose and hope. But if it becomes that place, those kids who are crying, those kids who are cutting, those kids, there'll be a stigma to going there. And so it's important that you provide tutoring and job interviews and military recruitment and college visits and wellness services. So all kids come there. The student council has meetings there when they're planning for homecoming. Like, you got to have it. It's almost like a student, I think of it more as like a student life center that you might find on a college campus that
Nice.
provides a variety of support for kids.
Gotcha. So, and you give academic support to people.
We do. So the next one is Academic Support Center.
Excellent.
This is just a quick virtual tour for you. This is one afternoon for tutoring. We actually provide tutoring in the content areas. English, math, and science are the ones that are the most needed by our students. But this room that you're looking at here is the Kiwanis Tech Lab and the AT&T Writing Lab. And in this room, any students that need access to computers, it's open every day until 5:30. It opens before school. It stays open all day. During the day, kids can use it for credit recovery and online courses that they might not be able to access in our general schedule. But in the afternoons, they can come in. It's always staffed by an English teacher. Kids can use it to apply for jobs. They can use it to write papers. We always have those 20 computers available as well as laptops. Another part of this is our Kiwanis One Bite at a Time, BYTE program, where students who are in high-level classes, but are students who are under-resourced and experience the digital divide. So maybe a student on free and reduced lunch who's in an IB program and needs a computer, they're provided a laptop, courtesy of Kiwanis, that they keep until the time they graduate, and then it becomes theirs.
Nice.
Okay, and mobile hotspots and stuff. So this is our Academic Support Center. These are just different rooms. That includes the College and Career Center you see as well. The Behavioral Support Center, this shows you everything from support groups to yoga classes. It also doesn't show a classroom that I need to add during the day that is a classroom where any student who has been out of school suspended has the ability to come to school instead. And while they're there, I have an English teacher, a math teacher, and a science teacher there. Our goal is that after that time of suspension, if the student's been with us 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, that we've connected them with services that actually are related to the infraction that caused them to be suspended, anger management classes or a mediation between them and a peer. But we also hope to send them back into their class with any assignments made up that they were missing in their core content. The magic to me about this is what you know as a principal is, yes, teachers are required to make up assignments with kids. At least I required them to. I understand in some places it's an unexcused absence, but I needed kids to pass classes. So you got to make it up. The problem is you give the kid the assignment, but they've missed the instruction. And so we've hired an English, math, and science teacher. They're all retired MHS teachers. And so our goal is to send the teachers send their work to the center, and we make up the work. What we also do, though, is that room's open all day to any student who needs tutoring. So a senior that has late arrival, or a junior that has early release, or a football player who wants to come during lunch because he knows he's got football practice this afternoon, but he's got a math test tomorrow. So you might walk in the Center for Behavioral or Academic Support during the day. There might be 16 or 18 kids there. Yeah. But maybe only 4 are there because they've been suspended. And 12 might just be there for tutoring. So that also decreases that stigma. And then the last is just what we call our care closets. So you see here what our food pantry looks like. You see here what our laundromat looks like. Our laundromat has not only a clothing closet, but our kids are free to donate, take, or borrow. Delta brings us a lot of toiletries for their flight attendants, so students can come here and get toothpaste, deodorant, toothbrush, soap, shampoo, conditioner, feminine products, anything they need. Also spirit wear. We ask our seniors to donate spirit wear back to us when they graduate. That helps that sense of belonging when a new kid can come and get some spirit wear. We have a shower. We have a school supply closet. So care closets are there for school supplies, clothing, laundry, food. You see some of our girls' prom dress shopping down there at the bottom. We dressed about 40 girls for prom this year. And so those are our care closets, again, all provided through donations and people in the community. And then our last here is just a summary. Staff composition, we've talked about 15 employees, 10 of whom are from outside the district. Return on investment is over 2 years, about a $250,000 investment from our district that was new money with a return rate of $3.4 million. Nice. So the return investment's very high. And our graduation rates are going up, and they're going up significantly since we started this work. I think our kids believe that they're listened to. I think they believe their community cares about them. And we've just said to our community, you know, we celebrate these graduates, but these dropouts are ours too, and they're less likely to go very far. Our graduates go all over the world, but not our kids that exit school. They stay really close by. So we need to decrease that and give them an opportunity as well so they can become contributing members of our community.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Good deal. Well, this is exciting, and as an administrator hat on, I'm thinking, okay, so I can get more of this if I can invest a little something and give you someone the latitude to do what you folks and your students have done.
Right.
Wow.
And you believe it's replicatable at other places?
I do think it's replicable as long as we remember it's flexible. And I think people have to understand, sometimes educators want to get in a hurry and not do the important work. So sometimes schools, in fact, we've had over 200 schools tour the center in the last 6 months.
Wow.
But when they come in and say, can I just take the survey you did with your students? It's not about intellectual property is the reason I won't give it to them. I was like, sure, I'll give it to you as a sample. But the reason my kids turned that survey in is they wrote it. It's theirs. And you got to take the time to do that and build the trust. And you asked a question about how long was it from start to finish. Well, I became the director of the center July 1, and we cut the ribbon on October 22nd and moved in. But it's unrealistic to think this is 5 to 6 months worth of work. Right. You have to understand the part that went before it.
So I might replicate this, but my graduate Albany or my graduate Pueblo might not look like yours, but the process might look a lot like
I mean, a school across town might need less, they might not need food pantries, they might not need clothes closets, but they probably need addiction services, okay? Or perhaps they need more mental, emotional health, maybe anxiety and stress and cutting. I'm working with a school in a town not very far from me that their greatest identified needs are self-harm, suicide, anxiety, and addiction. It's a very fluent area. Their center would look very different than ours. So it is replicable as long as it's flexible. And I think as long as people pay attention to the process and they don't try to take shortcuts. It's deep work. You have to be willing to do that.
And it started with discussions with students and discussions with teachers.
It continues with student discussions all the time. How can we make this better? And one of the really great things, and we should have done it in the beginning, and I don't know why we didn't think about it, but going forward, it'll also be, we are a 501c3 through our schools foundation. Our board of directors will be made up by students.
Wow.
Students and agency heads that will run
student
it.
voice there.
That's
So our
excellent.
student board of
Fantastic.
directors will be running it.
Well, this has been a great session. Mark, I've learned so much. I've enjoyed co-hosting with you.
Absolutely.
It's a great presentation. I know the contact information is going to be on the webinar. I encourage those of you that are viewing this to share it with your colleagues. These broadcasts are archived on our website at the National Dropout Prevention Center, www.dropoutprevention.org. Share these. They're out there for people to learn and replicate. That's what we like to see, and we appreciate that focus. I'd like to thank our viewers. Encourage you to chat with us, Twitter with us, communicate with us, ask questions. We'll put you in touch, or we can make the connections however it works for you. I want to thank you for viewing Solutions to the Dropout Crisis, brought to you by K-12 and Fuel Education. I want to thank you for your time, your work, and what you do out there, and thank you for using the National Dropout Prevention Center at Clemson University.